This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
The four Bohannon brothers, Jason, Zach, Matt, and Jordan, have combined in their Division I college basketball careers to score 3,880 points. Pretty remarkable for four brothers out of Eastern Iowa to all have successful Division I basketball careers. And the smartest and best shooter of the bunch joins the podcast today. His name is Zach Bohannon. Zach Bohannon, of course, played his high school basketball at Linn High School over in Marion, Iowa, before starting his college basketball career at the Air Force Academy. Zach spent 2 years out at the Air Force Academy before transferring to the Wisconsin Badgers, where he played with a lot of NBA guys like Nigel Hayes, Frank Kaminsky, Sam Decker. Those are some really great Badger teams. He even played in a Final Four for Wisconsin, the only Bohannon brother, of course, to play in a Final Four. But today he's coming on the podcast not only to talk about what it's like to have three brothers that are also great basketball players, but to talk about the NCAA, following his younger brother Jordan around the country to watch almost every one of his games over the past 5 years, and also the transition of being a college athlete to entering the professional world, which is something that Zach has done a really great job of. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode of the podcast. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, check out our website at moonlightgrahamshow.com. You can also subscribe to our podcast wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on social media as well, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys each and every week. So enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Zach Bohannon. All right, we are back in the Moonlight Graham Show studio with a Bohannon brother. We got a Bohannon brother in the house, Zach Bohannon. Thank you for coming into the studio.
No, it's a pleasure having me. Thanks for having me.
So, Zach, what was it like growing up with three brothers? I had three brothers growing up. I have a sister as well. So I know like the household can be kind of competitive. It can be a lot going on. What was the Bohannon house like with four boys running around?
First off, what number are you in the order?
I'm number two.
Okay, so
I'm like you.
Yeah, so you're the same as me. So my roommate at the University of Wisconsin, Ben Bruss, who's now on the Big Ten Network.
Yes.
He was a star player at Wisconsin, kind of filled the shoes of my older brother, Jason. When Jason graduated, Ben kind of stepped into those and was at shooting guard. And he used to tell me, as my roommate, he always would call me the neglected middle child that no one loved. So if that tells you anything, that was really who I was. I don't necessarily like
Do
to
your
use
parents
that.
know this?
I've said it before to my parents that I got called that, and they're like, that's not true. That's not how you were raised. And I was like, well, at the same time, Jason, who ever since I was born, he's acted like an only child. Like he's been that only child mentality as the oldest one, always thinks he can get his way. And he has had a grim reality realizing that he now has three brothers, all in their 20s.
It's funny you say that because when I go back, I say the same thing to my parents. You know, being the second child, the first one gets all the attention.
Yep.
The second one, when you go back to my parents' house now, there's baby pictures with all five kids. And it goes my older brother, Andy, baby picture. And then the second baby picture is a baby picture of me and my older brother.
Yep.
I never even had my own baby picture. And then the other three all got their own baby pictures. I never even had my own baby picture.
No, for sure, because the second one, the parents...
They had to save money on that.
I was just going to say that. So the second one, the parents always think, oh, well, we might have more. Usually they don't stop at two. There's usually three or more after you have your second child. And that kind of happens is that all the time that whether it was growing up having hand-me-down shoes, hand-me-down pants, hand-me-down shirts, and coming from me, I was always bigger than my brother was at his age because I'm 6'7", almost 6'7", 6'6.5". He's only 6'2". So like I grew at a faster pace. So most of the stuff that I got handed down to me never fit me. I always had the short pants because they were short. Right. So being the second child is not ideal in the pecking order.
Which brother got into the most trouble?
That is a great question. I would have to say the first Bohannon you had on the podcast, Matt, was the most mischievous of all of them. He was an ornery little guy. He actually, so I was a June birthday, so was Jordan. He was a June birthday, The Last of Us. We both went to alternative kindergarten, something that's familiar in Iowa, which I found out outside of Iowa. It's not that
I don't even
popular.
know what this is.
So alternative kindergarten is like a...
Do they hold? Is this like you get held back?
Yeah, it's a hold back year. Except it's like kind of more of an advanced preschool in my eyes, but it's for the kids who are young. If they went to kindergarten, they would be super young.
Right.
But if they get held back, then they become one of the older ones. So me and Jordan were held back in AK, where my brother Matt was a May birthday just a month before me and Jordan.
And he was a young kid in the class.
And he went, my mom was going to hold him back just like she did with me. But my grandma ended up saying, no, he needs to go. It's time to send him. So he went ahead. He was a whole year younger than almost everyone in his class, where someone like Josh Olgsby, who was also in his same class at Cedar Rapids, Washington, who went on to play at Iowa. He was like me, a summer birthday. So he was a year ahead of everyone. So technically my brother Matt and Josh were almost 2 years apart, being in the same class in high school.
Yeah, you always hear that with younger kids in class end up being troublemakers because like they're smaller, they got to be the class clown, they got to joke around, they got to pull pranks. But you're saying Matt might have been like that even before he got to school.
Yes, he was. Like literally, that's why he went to school early, was because he was that way in the household.
So out of your 4 brothers, what are you better than the other 3 at?
I like to joke. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're Zach. Which one of you, or what number were you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm Zach. I was the second one. I'm the smartest, tallest, best looking, and also the best shooter in the family."
Okay. Well, you're not the best shooter in the family.
No, I will beg to differ on that. No matter when we play horse or anytime we do a shooting contest, the one that you're talking to right now is the one who always wins.
Well, okay, I was going to save this for later, but you're bringing it up now. Your free throw shooting, Zach, your freshman and junior years is some of the worst free throw shooting I've ever seen, especially from a Bohannon.
It's literally called regression to the mean. I took like 7 shots those years.
Your freshman year, you were 6 for 14 from the free throw line.
Okay, 14 shots.
And your junior year, you were 1 for 6.
Once again, under the 7 shots I told you.
I know, but like that's not good. You gotta. I mean, you only get so many opportunities as a bench guy.
100% agree. But if you look back at my career, especially in some of those opportunities that I shot, I didn't come in until I would sit on the bench until late in the first half or in the second half, and they were bad opportunities to shoot. Do you know how hard it is to shoot free throws when you're ice cold?
Zach, I could go out right now, and I probably could make 19 out of 20.
That's fair. I'm not arguing.
I'm a little surprised. Well, actually, I love this.
I'm just surprised you looked up my stats. I'm actually upset.
This is what I do here on the Moonlight Graham Show. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to do the deep dives into the Utah game when you're at Air Force your sophomore year and you play 29 minutes, you put up 12 points, 8 boards, 5 assists. The Moonlight Graham Show is the place for you to talk about that game.
And those are the games that I want to talk about. And as a basketball player, those are the games that you want to highlight of your career, because I was on pace for a triple-double in the first half. And the funny thing is that game, I was a starting center for our Air Force team. The guy that I went against when I did the jump ball, he was 7'4". I'm not joking. He was 7'4". I did a spin move. I got a post up on one block. I spun around him because as a 7'4" guy, he's not the fastest or quickest. Got around him. I went to the other block to do a reverse layup. He had not moved. I kid you not. When I put up the shot for a reverse layup, he turned around and reached through the net and blocked me. That was how big he was.
Is that goaltending? Like if you
not like
net,
like he went under the net and blocked. Okay. Like his arms were that long.
So I want to talk about that Utah game. We might as well just talk about it now. Like, absolutely. I mean, is that the game? Is when you look back and you're like, man, I was as good as I've ever been that night.
I would beg to differ. I was maybe from a pure stat and getting on the court standpoint. However, like my senior year, I was good enough to play at a lot of schools when I transferred to the University of Wisconsin, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I was the fifth forward or center on a roster. I was the 9th man in 8-man rotation, and the 4 forwards who played in front of me all played in the NBA. Literally all signed contracts in the NBA. And people think, oh, well, he wasn't good enough. That was a Bohannon who never played. I'm like, that's fine. Like, I can live with myself because I know the truth behind the scenes on what I dealt with. Like, I was going up against Frank Kaminsky every single day in practice, and when he got in foul trouble, I played all of our games against Iowa because for whatever reason, Frank always got into foul trouble against Iowa or got hurt. And that was the game that I always ended up playing against. And it was all because I knew it would be ready because I was going up against NBA caliber players every single day in practice.
Right. Okay, backtrack to shooting contests with your brothers.
Yes.
So these exist.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm glad that they exist. I'm
Easter,
glad that you guys.
Thanksgiving, whenever the weather's nice enough and we can get a ball outside, a shooting contest always is entailed.
And your record is pretty good in them.
I don't think I've lost.
Do you think that? I mean, okay, is it a mind game? Like you got older brother stuff.
So here's the argument.
What makes Matt and Jordan tick, but what? But Jason doesn't have that over you.
No, none of them know. They can't outsmart me. That's the biggest thing. Going back to my original point, you asked my question, what am I known for? That's the biggest thing. Jason, Matt, and Jordan will all complain if you brought them on this podcast and asked about me commenting on this. They'll all say the only reason why he's saying that is that because he does behind the backboard shots or bank shots or whatever. I'm like, it's all about the ball going through the hoop. That's literally the point of a shooting contest. I'll go shoot threes all day long and still beat you. I just like to spice it up because shooting threes and making them is not fun.
So what's the go-to trash talk for your brothers?
For them against me, it's always exactly what you just talked about.
For you against them, because you got to get in their head a little bit.
Oh, I don't talk trash. I make my shooting do the talking.
What I like about the Bohannon brothers is I've watched all four of you play. Like I remember you playing at Wisconsin. I don't remember you playing at Air Force, but I remember watching you in certain games at Wisconsin. But what I thought was interesting is you would think that, you guys would all resemble one another on the court, and you're all pretty different players.
Absolutely. No, that's a really unique comment, and I'm glad you bring that up because Jason was the star of our family. Like he was the epitome, the prodigy son that he went away from the family footsteps of my dad being a Rose Bowl quarterback in Iowa.
Yeah, that made headlines. Yes. Gordy Bohannon's son.
Every single time Jason stepped foot on the court, they mentioned Gordy Bohannon's son, Rose Bowl quarterback. Yeah. Where now Jordan, it's Jordan Bohannon, the fourth Bohannon brother who's played college basketball. Like my dad doesn't even get mentioned anymore.
Well, yeah, it's funny because your dad was a major factor, like always showing your parents and stuff. And now Jordan's just had enough of a career where like Jordan Bohannon kind of stands on his own by this point.
Well, let's be honest also that when you're playing 8 years in college, of course you're going to stand on your own.
He could play next year too.
He will be playing a 6 full year if he plays next year.
Is he going to play next year? Can we break some news here?
We'll see. I mean, COVID, what has COVID not changed in this world? I would not be surprised, or whether he plays or not plays next year.
Does your family ever get together at like Easter or Christmas? Or I mean, I guess Easter, probably not Christmas and Thanksgiving because of basketball season. Everybody can get together, at least not yet. And you talk and you're like, Matt is the all-time three-point shooter at UNI. Jordan's the all-time three-point shooter at Iowa. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, the accomplishments just among the four brothers of not even talking about your dad.
But in our family, we count rings, and Jordan never won a state championship, so that's the biggest
But you and
argument.
Matt did.
And Jason. We all did. 2004, 2007, and 2011, if I'm not mistaken. We all each won our respective rings and for a state title, and Jordan never made it to state, except he did make it in golf, he likes to add, which I don't know why that gets thrown into the argument.
Yeah. I like that you treat Jordan like his little brother, or he's your little brother.
I mean, of course. Isn't that how all little brothers have to be treated?
I completely agree. As somebody that has a little sister and two your little brothers, like you always have to have the big brother upper hand on them.
Yep.
Which brings me to my next point, though. But you've been going to like all of Jordan's games his entire career. So like, what's the point of that?
So it was not planned by any means. I went to the
How is it not planned?
So the first few games of his career, he had injury. He broke or tore part of his skin on his non-shooting hand, I believe. Or no, it was a shooting hand. And he wasn't a starter by any means. And I was just happy to see him play for what his childhood goal was to be an Iowa Hawkeye. He was his goal was to be the starting point guard of the Iowa Hawkeye basketball team. And he was playing. He wasn't starting at this time. His first game on the road was at Notre Dame. Actually, no, they had just played a neutral site tournament in Florida. He got the starting nod on the road in the ACC Big Ten Challenge at Notre Dame. And it was kind of a special moment because, one, our family's Catholic. We grew up Catholic. And for him to get that first starting job on the road at Notre Dame, I was like, okay, I can't miss that. So my dad and I drove out there, went to the game together. And after that, he ended up having a phenomenal game. I think he was like 7 of 15 shooting threes. He ended up having like 21 points. They ended up losing. That was the first thing that I realized this could be a special career. And I told Jordan, like, from that moment on, I'm like, keep putting me down as a ticket, as a name, and I'm going to keep coming to the game. And one thing led to another, and it was like 10 games in. He's like, are you going to make it to all the games? I'm like, yeah, I promise I'll be there at all the games this year. And then the end of the season happened. They had just lost in the NIT, I believe, I can't remember who they played, TCU. They played South Dakota and then TCU. And we were walking out together. We had waited around, our whole family did. And I go, Jordan, so I made it to all your games this year. Are you going to give me any props? He goes, no, I would be more impressed if you made it to the rest of my games in my career. And I was like, really? And I go, challenge accepted.
So how do you make that work, though, with like life? Like, you have more to your life than just going to every one of your brother's games.
That is very true. However, I'm young, single, don't have a significant other. I don't drink or party, so it kind of limits what I do on the weekend. So it was one of those things that life is all about priorities. You have the opportunity to prioritize whatever you want in life. And right now, in this point in my life, I've always prioritized family and building our community, which has led me to getting a new state-of-the-art YMCA.
I saw that. Congratulations on that.
I appreciate it. That just opened up this Monday. We had our official ribbon cutting. So those are the things I prioritized at that time in my life. And it just has continued on one year after another, and now we're going on year 5. And unfortunately, the streak technically has broken because I was not able to go to a few of the games this year because of COVID restrictions. Some of the governors have executive actions that don't allow any fans, including family members, unlike Carver, where Carver at least has a couple hundred fans in the stadium or in the arena because of family. Where I've missed 4 games this year. So some people are like, well, the streak's still intact because you haven't missed it by choice. Like, you missed it because you just couldn't get into the gym.
So if he comes back for a 6th year, is there going to be a part of you that you're going to be like, you got to be kidding me?
I told him that after the 4th year. I said, Jordan, this promise was for 4 years of playing. Like, I made that commitment of 120 some games in those 4 years. And he told me, he keeps telling me, he's like, you don't have to keep coming to the games. I'm like, yeah, well, I feel kind of obligated to at this point.
When you pulled up to my house, the first thing I said was, I knew he'd drive a Camry. I got a 2008 Camry myself, and I got 244,808 miles on it. I checked it because I wanted to ask how many miles you have on your Camry.
So that is a great question. And that is my 3rd Camry I've had. I've had
best cars.
My very first car I ever had was a 2007 Camry. I had that for almost, I think, over 11 years. And I had 160 some thousand miles on it. Ended up selling it, bought a used 2016 Camry with about 10,000 miles. This was like literally right after that first season that I went to all my brother's games. And that's how the majority of the modes of travel that I go, with the exception of Penn State, Rutgers, and Maryland. Those are the only ones that I actually fly to. I'll drive to every game and leave before the game, get there an hour before the game, have just enough time to get gas, eat, go to the game, and then I'm back on the road immediately afterwards. So I put on my fair share of miles, and actually the reason why I got rid of my second Camry was I put so much on such a short period of time, it just made economic sense to sell it at that point and get a new Camry. And I'm already in 21 months, I've put on almost 30,000 miles on this Camry.
Amazing. So what do you do? What's your windshield time like? Podcasts, books on tape?
I am all about Automobile University. I am not listening very much at all to music. If I'm not listening to a podcast, I'm listening to
The Road?
The Road or my own thoughts. And that's one of the best times to think, is because obviously you can't text and drive or be on the phone, with the exception of being hands-free. And if I'm not on the call, I love just sitting there and just thinking, because it's sometimes the only time you have an opportunity. Because when you're home, you're in this constant go environment. You feel like, okay, well, what's going on in the world? If you're not doing work, what's the latest headlines? And I'm always on my phone reading, or on the computer looking up what's the latest things going on in the world.
Right.
And so at least that's the one sanctuary I have to be on my own.
Amazing. I mean, an amazing accomplishment. And I look back, and my younger brothers, like Neil, ran track at Iowa, and my brother Joey, he played baseball at Kansas State. And one of my regrets, and even my sister Megan, who just in high school, like, I wish I would have been to more of their stuff when they were playing. You know, when you're younger, you think you kind of have this, that things don't last forever, but you don't really have a good grasp on what that means yet. and then as you get older, it's like, man, it would have been fun to go to 2-3 more of those games.
So that's a fantastic point, and that's actually what kind of spurred me to do the whole commitment to go to all my brother's games. Was I went to the Air Force Academy, played out there for 2 years on the basketball team, and was a cadet at their service academy. I then transferred to play basketball at the University of Wisconsin. My career ended. My last year was Jordan's junior year in high school, and I took a job. I went to go work on Wall Street for a bit. Then I went and worked in banking in Chicago, and my first year of full-time work was my brother's senior year in high school. And this correlated to my brother's Matt's senior year at the University of Northern Iowa. And I missed a lot of my brother's games. I had only saw him play maybe, I think it was like 6 or 7 times in high school. And I felt bad that I never made it to any of his games. And I had a trip planned. I went to Marcus Page, who was my high school point guard when I was a senior. He was a freshman. I went to his senior night that year when my brother was a senior in high school. I went to his senior night at North Carolina when he was playing for the Tar Heels. And then I went to my teammate in Wisconsin, Frank Kaminsky's NBA game that next night. Well, long story short, that second NBA game, when I made that trip out to North Carolina, when he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets or Bobcats or whatever they were at that time, I think they had just transferred to become the Charlotte Hornets. But I went to that game, and my brother played his sub-state final game to go to Wells Fargo Arena to play for state. And I had talked to him before the game, and I said, or before the trip, I'm like, hey, I'm going to make this trip. You have to promise me that you're going to play for state. He's like, oh, Zach, I got it. We're going to state. No, done deal. Well, they ended up getting upset by Cedar Falls. And some guy.
Famous last words.
I know. Some guy named Green from Northern Iowa now, who ended up turning into a pretty good player. He was a couple years behind my brother. And I missed that. And I missed that game one, but I missed him not playing in state. And I told myself at that moment, I remember when I got the text that Jordan had lost that sub-state final game. I was in the NBA arena for my friend Frank, and I was like, why am I here? Like,
what am I doing?
This is not, going back to my original point, this is not the priority that I want set for myself. And that kind of was always at the back of my head at that point going forward, and that led me to obviously never missing any of his games at Iowa.
Why'd you go to Air Force?
So I wanted to be a part of something larger than myself. I always had a service before self type of mentality, and I always had the also mentality of having integrity at the forefront of whatever you do. And I realized that when I was getting recruited, I always wanted to get a great education and play basketball at a high level. And one of the assistant coaches at the Air Force Academy who was recruiting me said, hey, look, if you want to get a high major basketball experience and get an Ivy League education, the Air Force Academy is right for you. And that scares a lot of people away because people want one or the other. They don't want both. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, I can do this. Little did I know all the other military stuff that you had to put up in the process, like going to boot camp for 6 weeks before you even get to the basketball court.
Yeah, how hard is that? Like you can look up your Air Force and you got the outfit on, like you look like a military cadet.
Yeah, no, you definitely do. So honestly, the boot camp is by itself not that hard. It's not any harder than 2-a-day football practices in high school. It's just the constant grind of 6 weeks away, being away from your friends, being away from your family, and not having that instant connection. Like I was literally, my mode of communication was writing letters. And granted, this was 10 years ago, so they were a little bit more prevalent, but I can't even imagine the different mind games that will be played on cadets now going through boot camp.
Detachment from their phones.
Yeah, when you literally don't have a phone because you're instantly on at all times, and to get that taken away from you and only literally be able to get on it one time in 6 weeks is a change of pace that you'll never go through probably the rest of your life. And that was probably the biggest challenge, was just being disconnected. But thankfully, as I mentioned, summer of 2009 wasn't that big of a time. Like Twitter was even huge. It was just getting started. Right. Facebook was kind of there. It wasn't a big thing at that time. Instagram was even existent from a college standpoint.
And most of us weren't on smartphones at that point.
Exactly. Yes.
I was still rocking a flip phone in 2009.
I remember I had my BlackBerry. My BlackBerry was probably my favorite phone I ever had.
Oh, actually, yeah, I might have got a BlackBerry in like 2010. Like right in there, I had a BlackBerry. Remember what was that BBM?
Yeah.
Remember you could do BBM?
Yep.
That was like the coolest thing.
Exactly. No, it was probably the coolest phone at any time just because of having a full keypad.
Yes.
Obviously, especially the new phones. I have an iPhone now. They're technologically advanced and they fit to your fingers and whatnot.
Right.
And if we pull up a BlackBerries now, which I still have all my cell phones I've ever had, if you pull it up now, you're like, how did I like this so much?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge leap. Going from the flip phone to a BlackBerry, that's the biggest technological leap I've taken in my phone history, other than just getting a cell phone.
Just the fact on being able to have internet though on your phone was incredible. Even though the internet wasn't that fast, it was almost as slow as AOL dial-up on how fast it loaded. But that was the biggest thing, was having that.
Think about now, if internet goes out for an hour, you're just like, what? I'm in the Stone Age here.
Yep.
If it just goes out for an hour. So you had a pretty good thing going on at Air Force. If you look at your basketball stats, like you played pretty decent minutes for a freshman, and then your sophomore year, you start a game. We already mentioned that great game you had against Utah where you put up like legit numbers, where if you played 35 minutes, you might have had a triple-double that game. And then you decide to transfer. What was that process like?
So great question. And
thank you.
The biggest thing I like to tell people is that people don't realize is that I dealt with 2 injuries my sophomore year. I was named a starter before the season had started. I was literally in the starting lineup. Like Air Force is kind of different, is that when a new class comes in and the old class graduates, like they kind of pinpoint who the starters are before the season even begins. And I was named the starting center actually my sophomore year, and I was expected to do big things. And literally 3 weeks before the season started, I went down and hurt my knee. And I was like, okay, I think I can keep playing through it. Like it just one of those nagging injuries that kept bothering me and whatnot. And I went and got it checked out, and they're like, hey, you tore your meniscus. And I had already done that surgery twice on my right knee before. And this was the first time I had it on my left. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not a big deal. And they're like, well, if you want to have surgery now, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks. And I was like, I've done it already on my right knee. Let's just take care of it right now. And I don't want to keep playing through it. Well, my coach wanted me to keep playing and said, it's not worth it. Like, it's not worth it to have the surgery and sit out. Like, just keep playing. You'll be fine. Like, it's a minor, it'll be a nag. I'm like, no, I want to take care of it now. And there was a back and forth. And finally, the trainer and I sat down and said that what's best for me with this team surgeon was to just go in and have the surgery. And I said, I promised the coaching staff, I'm like, I'll be back in 3 weeks. I can be back. I was actually back. A surgery that normally takes 4 full weeks to get back on the court, I was back in 9 days doing running. And just because I was that I was that determined to get back on the court and get back to the starting lineup.
Wow.
And long story short, I get back fully, in my eyes, on the court before the season started. And we had a 4-hour marathon practice one day on a Sunday. And the first 30 minutes of the practice, I clipped my thumb on someone's jersey on a rebounding drill. And I was like, oh, dang, my thumb jammed. That hurts. Never said anything to anyone. At the end of the day, or at the end of practice, I went to the trainer and said, hey, I hurt my thumb. Can you look at it? And he literally says, hey, let me compare it to your other thumb. And he pulls my thumb all the way down, and my index finger and my thumb is a straight line where it normally should be an L. And I go, is that good? He goes, no, that's not at all. He goes, you tore your ulnar collateral ligament. I was like, I don't know what that means. He goes, it's called skier's thumb. This is out. You're going to have to have surgery, and you're going to need to be out 3 months. And I was like, really? Could it not have hit at a worse time? I just did everything I could to get back. And so I ended up having the surgery right away. The coach wanted me to tape it up and continue to play. And that was kind of the beginning battles of saying, look, this is what the coach is telling me I should be doing. Right. And he wasn't looking out for my best interest. And that was at that moment where I decided, when I was hurt, I took a step back and realized, is this who I want to be and who I want to play for? And I wanted to play in the NCAA tournament. And I said, if we continue to do the things that I think we are capable of at Air Force, we possibly could get there, but I could get a lot better opportunity to play somewhere else and have a chance almost guaranteed if I pick the right school. And that's what ultimately led me to the University of Wisconsin.
Yeah, you go to Wisconsin, you have to sit out a year because of transfer rules, which it seems like that's probably going to be a thing of the past here, is that, sitting out a year thing, especially like COVID has really sped up.
And I would like to add, as it should be, there should be no transfer rule where you have to sit out, because let's take a step back as a normal student, because first and foremost, these athletes are students first. They should be anyway. They aren't treated like it. They're treated like athletes because it's a multi-$14 billion industry that they're made off of the fruits of their labor. But with that aside, students can transfer from one school to the next. And do they have to sit out with their academic degree? No, they go and start their degree. And if people actually know the statistics, a normal student transfers at a 33% rate. 1 out of every student will transfer in their course of their career. College basketball and college football are not even close to that rate right now, and yet they still have to sit out. So I've never understood the whole sit out reason.
It is ridiculous. I agree. But it also, like, you took advantage of it, which was cool because you were able to get multiple degrees out of this, which is what everybody should be doing, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to get free education at a premier institution, like, hell, get as many degrees as you can to get ahead in life. So when that next phase happens, you can take advantage of it. And that's what you did.
It's a great point that I wish more athletes took advantage of.
Right.
Even my younger brother Jordan decided he graduated last year in 4 years.
He could be a he could be a dentist by the time he graduates Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. But he ended up deciding to just get a double major because he didn't want to go through the hassle of getting a master's.
Well, he's got a podcast going. He's got a lot going on right now.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of other things that he's doing behind the scenes with the name, image, and likeness bills and whatnot that he'll be able to take advantage of if he ends up sticking around for a 6th year. But going back to your original point, I did take advantage of it, but if you look at how I was playing, my best basketball, as good as I thought I was playing when I was a bench player in my 5th and final year, my best basketball, and you can ask even Jordan Taylor, who was our first team All Big Ten starting point guard, who was literally came out as the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year his senior year. I was playing the best of anyone that time when I transferred from Air Force to Wisconsin because I felt so free. I felt like I could do whatever I wanted. I wasn't in a system like the Air Force Academy where it was a Princeton offense where you had to be a robot and run the offense exactly to a T. Where I got to Wisconsin, they're literally, they don't call plays. Like, they don't realize that, like, fans don't realize this, is that there's really not much of an offense. Like, it's just free flow and you just go play. And that's what I was used to in high school. And so some of those open gyms in the summer, Jordan Taylor made the comment to me once. He's like, dude, if you were 6'9", you wouldn't be here. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, you would be at Duke. He's like, that's how good you could be. And so
was it frustrating then to have to take a back seat?
Exactly, because Coach Ryan saw me play in the summer and he kept saying how well I was playing in the media. And I knew that entire year I couldn't even step foot on the court. So my original point, arguably the best year that I could have done the most damage and played the most was that transfer year that I was forced to sit out,
right?
Without it being my own choice.
Yeah, that is frustrating, and we'll see changes here. But when the change happens, the NCAA could be a thing of the past, as
it probably should be, because they've had their fair share of opportunities to try to make college athletes' rights and reforms that should be in the college athletes' favor, that they've just continued to either A, not, or B, kick the can down the road like they just recently did with the name, image, and likeness vote that they were supposed to be having a couple weeks ago, that they're now punting to see what the Supreme Court decision and then what the National College Bill of Rights bills that have gotten passed by the Senate or gotten proposed by the Senate or the House, see what those kind of go forward.
Do you think college athletes should be paid then?
So that framing of the question, having a master's in political communication where I learned about agenda setting and framing of different topics, is the epitome of why that argument has never gained traction. Is that if you ask that question point blank, the majority of people say, no, college athletes already get enough. They get a free education and whatnot. But that's not what we're advocating for. We're advocating for the rights of the same economic rights that the music major that is the same student at the same university, that the basketball player doesn't have the same rights. Like, if you're able to get a full ride music scholarship, you can go sing and make a best-selling album and make royalties on that because you're using your talents in the same capacity of getting the same degree. Where in basketball, you're literally limited. It's an antitrust issue at the end of the day, that the NCAA caps what college athletes are able to make in revenue outside of what they're given. And that's the whole argument, is that it's a monopolized system. They literally are a textbook example. The NCAA is a textbook example of what a cartel is. And being a former economics major, that's what they are, the same equivalent of OPEC that literally sets oil prices on a daily basis.
I didn't know we were going to get into this. Well, I mean, we're already into it, though. So, like, your post-athletic career, you don't strike me as a guy that, like, spends a whole lot of time being like, I played basketball at Air Force in Wisconsin. Like, you moved on pretty quickly to, like, this was this time in my life, and I'm moving on because, always looking forward.
That's the one thing that I've always liked to hang my hat on is that I was always forward looking. Even when I was at the University of Wisconsin, I was literally in an MBA program with the average age student who had 7 years of work experience. They were in their 30s, and I was going back in the afternoon to the locker room with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds.
Right.
So I was living this like dual life. Like one of my best friends in the MBA program was 40 years old, and I would go back and Nigel Hayes, I was mentoring and being in the same locker room as Nigel Hayes, who was a 19-year-old. And so I had this very strange fifth year, senior year, being the captain of a Final Four basketball team. It ended up all kind of coming to fruition. Even though I had expected to play a little bit more, I was still, no matter what I did, whether I was in the locker room, I was looked at as that smart MBA student.
Right.
I was the oddball. And then when I went to the MBA classes, everyone looked at me as that captain of the Final Four team. And so like I was always this oddball fit that I always used to my advantage on saying, okay, how can I use this as leverage to get me to the next place? And that MBA got me to a job as an investment banker on Wall Street, which was my dream at the time. After realizing that didn't live up to what I had thought it would be, it ended up leveraging me into a great job in my first job out of getting my full-time MBA in Chicago. And so I kept using basketball to get me to the next step, which a lot of athletes I feel like don't take advantage of, is that basketball can build so many incredible connections no matter what school you're at. My brother Matt did it at the University of Northern Iowa. You can see it all across the country. If you do it right, you can build a wealth of a network that will only be beneficial for you in the future.
Yeah, and I think the goal there is use it for as long as you need to, right? And then eventually you have enough credibility in the outside of the basketball world that you don't need to be Zach Bohannon, ex-basketball player. You're just Zach Bohannon doing whatever you're doing now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And that's what I've always tried to do. I do a weekly talk show for KCRG in Eastern Iowa. It's called On Iowa Live during the Iowa basketball season that just talks about the Iowa basketball team and my brother and whatnot. And they always call me noted expert on the NCAA, former Badger, Zach Bohannon. And I hate
noted critic of cartels.
That's probably a better tagline that I should be introduced by. But that's what I hate getting introduced as former Wisconsin basketball player, because that's not who I want to be. Like I was just talking to my best friend, Zach Showalter from the Wisconsin basketball team yesterday. And I told him, if what you did yesterday looks big, then you haven't done anything today. And that's what I've always tried to have as my daily motto, is that I'm trying to top what I did yesterday on a daily basis.
Yeah, I remember I had breakfast with a guy by the name of Doug Reichart, who used to run Holmes Murphy about 6 years ago. And I remember he was asking about my background, and I was talking about my baseball career, and he just nipped it in the bud right there. And he's just like, no, you don't get it. Like, never talk about your baseball career ever again in a professional setting. And this is why. And it really changed how, like, where I was at professionally, because it's like, you don't want, that to be your tagline anymore.
Yeah.
You want to be something different, right? You want to be an expert in your current field.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I try to do. I never mention basketball or my basketball career. It will naturally obviously come up because especially
it's part of who you are.
Yeah. When you're in Iowa,
stuff.
They're like, oh, Bohannon, are you related to that Jordan Bohannon? And yeah, then that starts to kick in where I talk about going to my brother's game.
I beat him in the backyard.
Exactly. So when I have to feel out the situation and get to know the person before I can actually start saying these things. So
I was looking at your Air Force profile, right? And they always do these like quick facts, especially when you're a freshman or sophomore, get to know Zach Bohannon. And so I'm curious, that was 10, 11 years ago now, right? It was 11, 12 years ago, actually.
Yep.
So I'm going to go through what you wrote from your quick facts when you're at Air Force, and you just tell me if they've changed and what they've changed to.
I'm scared.
So your goal at that time was to one day own a business and be a coach.
That's fair, yeah.
Still?
And I technically have my own strategy consulting business.
Check.
And I've coached youth basketball, which honestly, that was the best basketball experience of my entire life. I'm going to be 100% truthful when I say this. When I took my first job in Chicago, our boss at the time asked me if I wanted to coach his fifth grade basketball team. He's like, they're not very good. They got dead last in the league last year. And I was like, no, I don't want to do it. He ended up saying, hey, how about you be my co-head coach? You don't have to be there all the time. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, fine. I reluctantly agreed. We were one game out. We lost the last game to win the conference title, and that might be the most devastating loss of my entire sports career.
That's saying something, not the Kentucky loss in the Final Four. But all right, so your number one hobby when you were a freshman at Air Force was reading.
and it still is. I wish I had 27 hours in the day to continue to get to read more than the 4 to 5 hours that I do on a daily basis.
Your favorite book at that time was the Bible. Still
And
true?
Still consider myself a devout Catholic. The pandemic has changed things. I have not been able to go to church every Sunday like I did pre-pandemic, but I still consider that a good read.
Outside of the Bible, what was the best book you read in 2020?
Best book I read in 2020. There were so many good ones, but Bill Browder wrote a book. It's a couple years ago old, but I read it. It's called Red Notice, I believe. But Bill Browder is a American who went over to Europe and then Russia to be a Russia wealth manager, and it's a international relations meets crime meets thriller novel, but it's based on a true story. It's fascinating because
what time period was this?
Literally just within the last decade or two.
Yeah, I mean
he literally has run-ins with all the way up to Vladimir Putin.
The Russia over the last 25 years, it went from a communist state to a capitalist state. So you had all these like oligarchs come in and become like billionaires overnight. Like
exactly,
it's during our lifetime.
No, exactly. Like, and it's crazy. And me being an intelligence officer, I served in the Iowa Air National Guard. I got back into the Air Force after the fact, which is a whole nother story. Yeah, a whole nother podcast, probably. Yeah, exactly. But long story short, I just got back from doing 7 months of intelligence training on geopolitical strategy, and I would be lying if I said that Russia and China weren't at the forefront of, as we know in the national security strategy, Russia and China is our 2+3, the top 2 countries that we focus on, and just seeing a high level learning about it from like in the books, like I talked about in that Bill Browder book, and then seeing the behind the scenes with my top secret security clearance, what actually goes on. It's just a fascinating correlation.
I like this. Okay. Your favorite foods at that time were steak and shrimp.
Yes, I
feel like that's a lazy answer.
It is a very lazy answer. However, when I was in Texas, which is not the place to experience with food diets by any means, since you're in super red country, I actually went vegan and vegetarian for a time. And I now consider myself, I say I'm a cheating pescatarian. I'll eat fish. I'll occasionally eat chicken, but I've not had red meat for, let's see, it's been since July 4th was when I started that. That I have not had that. So I guess that's no longer in the books.
All right. Your favorite TV show, this is another boring answer here, is Sports Center.
Okay, well, that's not even like existent anymore now.
I know.
Sports Center's like now on Twitter.
I feel like that was the go-to answer for every 18-year-old 10 to 15 years ago, though, because Sports Center just played on loop with Stuart Scott.
Absolutely. That was they asked me that question when I didn't have a smartphone. So come on, Sports Center was
what's your go-to show now?
My 2 favorite shows of all time. I never watched any TV shows until I graduated from Wisconsin because I was always so focused on something else. But 2 top favorite shows, hands down, The Big Bang Theory and The West Wing.
Okay. I have not watched The Big Bang Theory.
What?
I have not watched it.
I think we're going to have to end this podcast.
But I have watched The West Wing, and I like The West Wing. Yeah,
I just like The West Wing? That I've never heard anyone give a lukewarm answer on The West Wing.
I haven't watched enough of it.
Okay, that's fair.
Like I like Aaron Sorkin. I like the dialogues. I like all of his movies. If you didn't watch The West Wing, it's a lot to swallow. Like, it's one of those shows now where it's like, oh my God, I got 100 and some episodes of that. Maybe I'll just watch something brand new. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot to take in. But, I'm a huge Rob Lowe fan, like Martin Sheen. Like, there's nothing that I don't like.
Yeah, his son went off the deep end when I was at the Air Force Academy, but that's a whole other story.
Big Charlie Sheen fan, too. Favorite movie at the time was Shawshank Redemption. Another safe answer.
What?
It's a safe answer. It's a good answer, but it's a safe answer.
It's a great movie.
Has it changed in 12 years?
It's a great movie. I mean, it's still one of the top movies I've seen ever.
Okay, so we're still going with Shawshank?
I mean, what other movie would you say is up there?
Field of Dreams. Bull Durham.
You're a baseball guy, but come on. Those movies are awful if you're not a baseball fan.
Oh, my God. You need to expand your horizons. The person you want to meet, Jesus?
Well, that's playing off.
What about living person today?
See, that's also a loaded question because I've met 3 presidents. So, like...
Well, one you haven't met?
I mean... Yeah, I guess meeting Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton would be cool, but I've already met George W. Bush and Barack Obama and President Trump briefly. So those are all 3 that I've met. So like when you meet people, like that was a unique thing. When we went on our Final Four run, our team threw out the first pitch at a New York Yankees game.
Wow.
At the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium. So everyone keeps saying like, the They talked about, for example, the president not throwing out the first pitch at the New York Yankees game. I'm like, oh, I've thrown out the first pitch at New York Yankees game. They're like, no, you haven't. I was like, no, I have. So long story short, when you meet all these people, and when we were at that Yankees game, we met Derek Jeter. Like my best friend Zach Showalter and I was able to chat with Derek Jeter and talk about his latest dating scene that he was at the time.
You asked Jeter about his dating life?
I did not. My best friend did, and he asked him about, hey, whatever happened to Mika? What was her name?
Minka Kelly.
Yeah, Minka Kelly. And he just laughed it off like, come on.
Well, yeah,
come on,
like
dude.
he's going to give you a straight answer.
Well, I mean, she was what, like the equivalent of the shortstop star of his dating scene before he got married, of all the people that he dated.
His current wife's pretty...
That's what I'm saying.
I think she's actually an upgrade over Minka Kelly, which is actually saying a lot.
That's fair, but like you can put his dating... How do we even get into Derek Jeter's dating scene?
You brought it up. you're the single guy. All right. Well, I know you got a tight timeline here, Zach. So we end every episode with the 5 big questions. Okay. So first question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
I've said this privately before. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. All-time favorite teammate, hands down, was my brother Matt when we went and played for a state championship against Harrison Barnes and Doug McDermott. My senior year, it was his sophomore year. It was the first and only time any of us 4 Bohannon boys were able to play together. And it was just a special season. As much as we banged heads nonstop, I'd put that above any other sports experience I've had in my life.
Who guarded Barnes?
I actually did. However, our best athlete was suspended for that game, and I still, to this day, he was my best friend growing up. If he would have been suspended, and he would have been able to guard him because I wasn't by no means a good defender. We probably hands down won that game.
Ooh, that's quite a statement.
It's not a statement; it is a fact.
Well, all right. What's one memory from your career? And maybe it's that Utah game, or maybe it's the Final Four. But when you look back on your basketball playing career, that you just think of so fondly.
Another great question. You do great research for these podcasts, so well done to you. I think I've already mentioned it. One, just being able to be there for all of my brother's games off the court, just being able to see all the ups and downs of someone like him who was doubted from the very beginning that he would never be able to play in his brother's shadows and in his brother's footsteps, and that he would never be good enough to play where he's at currently. Like, he didn't even get offered from Wisconsin. Like, I was calling, my older brother and I were calling the Wisconsin coaches to say, hey, look, I would just offer, you need to offer this kid. Like, he's going to be a good player in the Big Ten. Give him a chance. And they weren't interested, and they went a different way. And so to be able to see him all that was a fantastic thing to see, and still being able to see on a daily basis. To go back to my original point, on the court, the best experience was, like I said, mentioned playing with my brother. Being able to start for a state championship, watching up and see my parents at half court with Jordan and Jason both sitting next to them was a moment that I'll never forget.
Family first. On the flip side of that, what's the one game or play that nags at you?
The biggest game that nags at me is going back to that same thing, is that state championship game, my senior year. It's always there at the back of my mind.
God dang it, childhood best friend.
I know, right? But the other thing that nags at me is that thumb surgery I had, or the thumb injury, I should say, getting hurt in that practice, because I look back on it and I'm constantly reminded, whether I'm at my computer or whether I'm writing or whatnot, like how much
it literally nags at you.
Yeah, literally.
It
like
hurts.
it's that too. Like, I'll have arthritis to it, but like I'll look down and I'll think like, wow, my life has totally changed because of that one surgery, that one injury I had, because it made me take that step back and it got me closer to my family back at the University of Wisconsin. And I think back, I'm like, no, what? I wonder what would have happened if I would have stayed at Air Force. I'm like, I would have been an Air Force officer, but I would never have been able to do the things I've been able to do by going to my brother's games and whatnot. And then all the friends that I would have not been able to meet at the University of Wisconsin. Like, you just think like, would they have still went to a Final Four? Would they still went to a national championship game? Would I still got my MBA? Would I went to Wall Street? All those things I wanted to do. It's amazing how something as little as just clipping your thumb on a teammate's jersey that led to a surgery that changed my trajectory of my life for better, for worse. And I guess it's still TBD.
Interesting. You spend a lot of time on the road. What's your go-to meal on the road? You got 15 minutes. There's a lot of drive-through fast foods. There's Casey's. What's the Zach Bohannon I'm eating in my car meal?
So my meal, and you're going to laugh at this, is my go-to meal. And part of the whole going back to my vegetarian and
cheating
vegan
pescatarian
thing. Yeah, exactly. All those things. I actually gave up all sweets starting the last day of my 29th birthday, or 29th year before I turned 30, and I haven't had sweets in over 7 or 8 months since then. But anyways, to my point, what I used to always go to, I haven't drove very much because of the pandemic, but I would not eat fast food. I would go, when I would fill up for gas, I would go to the gas station, and I would get a bottle of Fiji water, a bag of pretzels, and a bag of peanut butter M&Ms. That was my go-to, and I would eat it because my drive is I'm a straight line drive type of person. I go straight through, and I only stop when I absolutely have to. I'll go get gas. I'll go to the restroom quick, and I'll get back on the road, and I won't stop and eat. I'll eat those snacks just to keep me going on the road.
All right, final question here, Zach, is what's the best advice you've ever received?
I actually just got this a few weeks ago from someone I consider a mentor, a business guy back in Cedar Rapids. He told me to be cognizant of what you say yes to. And I was like, okay, well, can you adapt to that a little bit more? He goes, every time you say yes, you're saying no to something else. And going back to my original point on priorities and about family and about faith and all the different things that I try to pride myself on, I'm saying no to something else. I'm saying no to partying. I'm saying no to
peanut butter M&Ms.
I'm saying no to a significant other that I could be possibly dating because my priorities are my family, faith, and fun. And fun, I consider right now, is really, I don't have much because I don't have any spare time. But that's what it goes back to, is that the best advice is every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And it's a great point that I'm now trying to live on a constant basis. And I just have never put it as succinctly as that guy gave me that advice did.
That is great. Well, Zach, thank you so much for coming in studio here at the Moonlight Graham Show. I admire big families. You know, the Flatterys are an Irish Catholic family as well, you know, and so I always like other families where they have boys that go out and do stuff. And so I've always followed the Bohannons, and I've always followed you as well. So it's been fun to track your not only basketball career, but your professional career. And it's fun to get you in studio as the second Bohannon brother. One day, maybe we get all four on the podcast. It'd be fun, but thank you so much for coming on the pod.
No, I appreciate it, Tim. It was a pleasure having me, and seriously, if an opportunity ever came up where maybe not just me, but getting all my 3 brothers and I, and we can just talk trash to one another, that would be a lot of fun.
You know, maybe we do it around a shooting contest.
I would definitely win.
Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.